Okay, good. Well, thank you very much for bearing with us for that 15-minute break. We're ready to go now. First speaker up is Stephane Chenard, who is a senior external consultant with Euroconsult, a very highly regarded research agency specializing in space markets. He's got more than 25 years of experience in the satellite industry, handling numerous consulting assignments, which assess the market for future satellite applications and evaluate investment risk and business plans for a wide variety of clients. He's also a major contributor to Euroconsult's research reports.
Good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you are. Greetings from Paris. Right, quick word on Euroconsult. At these conferences, people have their own product. It's easy for them. My task today is to talk about the whole planet and the state of the market, which at this point in time is a little bit messed up and maybe not going exactly the way everyone would like. We are a research and advisory firm. We tend to think we have the largest consulting staff in the satellite industry, and we work on all aspects of economic and technical feasibility in satellite communication and observation projects. The energy sector is certainly one of the vertical markets on which we spend the most time. It is an industry that's used to deal with volatile events in difficult places, and so it's very good at landing on its feet and at balancing demand and supply. Before we get to that point, a word on the state of the Satcom industry itself. I'm not going. We all read the same newspapers, or at least we all read newspapers. I'm not going to belabor points that we are all aware of. However, at the beginning of this year, the satellite industry already had to deal with the fact that it was pretty much oversupplied, which translated into low fill rates, a long period of price drops, which had stabilized. It looked like both the demand and supply sides of the market had started to get comfortable with where the prices were, but clearly there was quite a bit of pain. There was quite a bit of uncertainty on where the existing players were going, on where all of these dozens of new projects were going, and how it was going to be financed and whether the demand would really be there. No one in the satellite business has really been hurt at this point by the market conditions as they turned. There have been a few bankruptcies, or rather there have been a few restructuring processes, at the end of which the companies usually expect to land in even better shape than they came in, since the debts will have been wiped out. We'll see. There have been a couple of casualties where the recovery process is a lot more uncertain. The problem is that the investment community was already started to get a little bit tired by this steady onslaught of projects, and had quite frankly moved past the stage where they were terribly interested in seed rounds, in exploration, in adventure, and we're starting to look for implementation and near-term results. Right now, if you have cash, you have a lot of friends. There's no shortage of companies and industries that are looking for investors, for lenders, and so the investment community has a very wide range of targets, both in and out of the telecom industry. While everyone appreciates that the telecom industry is not a bad place to be at this point in time, if you are looking for seed money, maybe it's a little late for that. The energy industry is in an interesting place as well, but it's used to being in an interesting place. The graph that I've chosen to illustrate is something that I must have seen half a dozen times already in webinars and articles. It's an EIA projection of how demand will catch up with the stockpiles of oil, with the temporary but extremely intense oversupply of oil. I'm not going to answer any of those questions any more easily than anyone else on this planet. However, let's list the questions. We don't know what the recovery will look like, and much more to the point, we don't know how quickly the process will play out. We have to be careful when people talk about the future these days. You would think they talk about the next 20 years when they really talk about the next 3 weeks, the next 3 months, the next year. Everyone has different tolerances for those time scales. If we look at the long term, however, we may have gone past, and I'm not answering this, have we gone past peak oil demand? Is there 30% of the workforce in developed countries, in industrialized countries, who have decided that they can work from home, that they like it, they don't enjoy commuting, and so they're not going to use the car nearly as much as before? Is there 30% of seats in office towers that, on second thoughts, don't have to be in a tower? And so, are we going to need less towers in the future, which is again less construction, less oil? Are there 30% of plane tickets that won't be bad because the guy in the seat didn't really want to be in the seat, doesn't really have to be in the seat and to travel 12 hours for a 2-hour meeting, which doesn't. He never felt, she never felt that made sense, and so that might not happen. And so, while those sectors will recover, there's a real possibility that the demand for this particular form of energy will not recover soon to the point where it was. It could if the emergent markets keep emerging, but they have their own sets of issues. There's a possibility that their growth will not look the same and will not be as fast, keeping in mind that up until 2019, the growth of most growing sectors was quite fast. And so if we slide back in time 5 or 10 years, we're not exactly back to the cave age. And there was a lot of oversupply in the world. There were a lot of those situations that were just waiting for something to rebalance. That might have happened. Specific to the oil sector, the U.S. shale industry, is it going to come back? That's not clear. And there it depends very much on the oil prices. And while they have very well recovered, there's a lot of producers that break even not at $30, not at $40, but at $50 or $60 or more. And the problem for the Satcom industry is that it's those guys who need Satcoms the most. Because the oil fields, the mature oil fields in Saudi Arabia who can break even on $25 maybe, they don't need Satcoms. It's the rigs that need Satcoms. It's all that need Satcom the most. It's the really difficult and remote places. And those are in the most trouble. Let's look back in time. Back in November, the two players who share roughly 50% each of the VSAT market, of the VSAT service for the energy sector market. Speedcast, now in restructuring for reasons that don't have to do entirely with the energy sector, but partly, was saying essentially that the market had stabilized, and what they lost, they recovered. What they lost in terms of rigs that were stacked, they recovered in terms of additional work from existing customers. So things were more or less stable but not growing. And the story that the investment community had been waiting to hear about was growth, not stabilization. RigNet, which continues, which by the way was much less diversified in terms of how many vertical markets they were tapping into ended up being exposed to at the end of the day, did not have a significantly different story. It was also stable-ish. Exploration was difficult. The latest update, no surprise, is that exploration is going to be delayed even more. And so where does that leave us in terms of possibly the future picture? Let's look at the expectations that have been voiced over the past 5 years, 10 years, sometimes longer, for where the energy industry would sit in the Satcom market. First of all, when you look at those massive machines on the high seas, you would expect them to be absolute massive consumers of satellite bandwidths, and they have not been. And that was something of a disappointment and of an anomaly. So the expectations were that those big rigs that are best friends in the satellite sector would be increasingly dominant, increasingly important, increasingly dominant players in the oil industry. Generally true, because the oil tends to be found on the high seas. The pace of oil discoveries had slowed, and more of it was not on land, where everything that could be discovered has not been discovered, but most of it. At least the discoveries were being made on the high seas. But again, there's the cost factor that comes into play. There's the fact that some of the oversupply is going to take a long time to wipe out. And so those high sea rigs, it's a very difficult decision right now to deploy them. That those rigs would be increasingly automated, the digital oil field and all the good things that we heard about in the first session. So nobody really disagrees with that. But a lot of the oil industry was really far behind the curve, was really waiting for another study before they decide to move on. The energy sector is, it's not that they're more hidebound or traditional than the others, but those are complex machines. And it's one thing to say, I'm going to put IoT devices on the rig, and it's another to decide exactly where, on what pump, and what will be the results. So Chevron, for instance, has done studies that showed that if you monitor your pumps more closely, and sometimes it means by not eyeballing them, but by putting a machine on it, the level of the discussion in the oil industry publications on IoT is, frankly, when you look at them coming from the telecom sector, a bit shocking, because those guys looked like they were discovering that that temperature sensors existed and you could connect them to a computer. So the big companies have long moved past that point, but the oil industry has a lot of small companies that had not. And when they hear that it's going to save them money in the long term, as in the shipping sector, the reaction often is, I don't care about the long term. I care about the next quarter. In the long term, I will have sold my ship and retired to my private island. That's why I don't want to invest on anything that's good for me in 2 years. 2 years is another universe. Cyber has been an absolutely paralyzing fear for the energy sector, which as a result has spent a good part of the past couple of years trying to decide if they really want to take the risk and connect those things, no matter what the benefits might be. Let's wait for another round of studies. And at the end of the day, the connectivities are pretty thin. And if you sell devices, you might be in a good place. If you sell engineering, you're probably in a good place. If you sell bandwidths, it's a marginal sector. There are lots and lots of sensors that just produce data for the archive. Which data do we export? What do we do with it? Prove me that it helps producing more oil or getting a better price or getting more revenue is really another issue. Then there's the workforce. Some of them want to be off the rig. Some of them don't. Many of them right now want to keep their jobs. If it involves staying on the rig, but they will. And so at the end of the day, it's easy to defer investments a little bit longer. It's extremely difficult at this point to justify capex, and savings is something that are good again if you have a longish term view. However, the energy industry is definitely more than oil. First of all, there's gas. Gas has been the energy of the future. A lot of countries were looking at using less oil, more gas. And right now, it's politically, the thing to do is to use less oil. The vast, maybe not the majority, but a lot of people on this planet want less oil to be pumped and burned. And they are getting heard for very good reasons. So there's that. So gas was our friend. Gas, is it going to be a bigger consumer of Satcom bandwidths or not? Gas plants tend to be even more volatile places than oil. They are more difficult to stop and have to be controlled very closely. That could mean more sensors and more responsive monitoring and maybe more latency intolerant communication networks. Then there's all the renewables. Occasionally, you see a press release saying that this windmill is connected by a VSAT and you need to monitor them all the time. There's a lot less VSATs than wind turbines. And so that's another sector where communications is maybe not the first preoccupation. And when you put up a turbine, you might put in a fiber. And how many turbines are going to be in places where you need to put VSATs? On paper, a lot of them. In practice, not so many. I would close with smart grids. If you put more renewables in your energy grid, the grid needs to be smarter because the energy cannot be stored. And there you need very good communication networks. A smart grid is to a large extent a communication system. Where do satellites fit in there? Are they the peculiarities of VSAT? Are they going to be attractive, or are they going to be a problem because of the latency, because of the bandwidth, because of a million reasons that all require studies? We don't know. What's likely is that the oil industry is not going to pull that quickly out of its current situation, that it will use more communications and IT, but not as fast as the vendors would like, if the past is any lesson. Having said that, however, the digital oil field companies were growing at 20% a year, the people who sell the devices and the engineering. And so in recent years, yes, it had taken off. We'll see if that takeoff really continues. The renewables have definitely a lot of momentum. They still have to really connect to the telecom industry and to the Satcom industry. And we'll see where that takes us. So it's been more questions than answers. I look forward to the discussion, and we'll see if I can be any more help when we get to that point. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Arnaud. And just a quick introduction. Arnaud is the Senior IT Director for TechnipFMC, aligning IT strategies with business demand, focused on ITIL, infrastructure, networks, telecoms, enterprise systems, and security. His experience extends to similar positions in Hess, Baker Hughes, and Schlumberger. And thanks for joining us, Arnaud. If you'd like to take the floor, please carry on.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Can you? Well, I'm glad to join this webinar today. I actually see a lot of names I've met from people I've met all through the years. So I'm glad to come here and give you a bit of a view from an oilfield service company going through these pretty rough times, and why we think that, first, we are not dead. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but certainly why the connected oilfield is part of the transformation we have to go through to survive. Right. So for us, and it's been well identified before, we've talked about digital and how digital technology helps support the development of our oilfield industry, but clearly the connected oilfield is a critical pillar to any digital strategy we have, which for us is really focused into transforming the field economics for our clients. And so today I'm going to briefly touch about on three main domains, which involve how this connected oilfield, how we see the connected oilfield benefiting field development and field execution. So TechnipFMC is a company that is involved in delivering equipment for exploration and production, but also build and involved in big projects, whether it's subsea, platform, LNG companies. And so big project development and execution is a significant portion of our activity. Then I'll touch about the digital twin and how the connected oilfield will relate to that. And then when it comes to remote operation, which is definitely a strong use case for the connected oilfield, well, just to remind us about the intangible and how actually this virus situation has somewhat impacted or almost made it mandatory nowadays to use those remote operation technologies. All right, so when I said the connected oilfield is a foundation, it is because through that connected oilfield, we can access real-time data and gain those new insights, understand how our equipment work, how we operate, be able to actually manage our activity better, learn a lot on what's gone right, what's gone wrong, and go through a continuous improvement of our operation. Obviously, remote support, having that ability to connect to any project, any asset, anytime, anywhere, it's definitely extremely important for business continuity nowadays. And then by all the data and knowledge that we capture through the connected oilfield, then we can use AI, we can use machine learning, we can make and develop automation and essentially make us a stronger, more efficient company at a lower cost and protect our margins in that manner. Obviously, in the current environment where we're under extreme pressure to preserve cash, but still return some investments. You know, the ability to preserve our margin is critical. So the oilfield accelerated by digital. When we look at some of the big projects we're involved in, whether it's subsea, maybe a smaller onshore project, or those big LNG plants that we may have to build, through the three phases of whether develop the execution and then the operation of that asset, you know, digital has a strong role to play, and we can only achieve that through a connected oilfield. Right. So whether it's through the development where we design, optimize, and select the best solutions, whether we start executing in an area which is usually hard to reach, and you know, I saw the 5 megabits bandwidth from the previous presentation from exploration rig. I mean, you know, some of our vessels are more in the 10 to 15 megabits when they have to connect on those large projects. And then once we pass the execution and the deployment of the plant or the subsea assets, then we have to operate it. And then there's a stream of real-time data that we need to review, analyze, learn from, and all this data that we've gathered along the project kind of loops back, so we're even more efficient for the next projects, right? And all of that allows us to drive our cost, schedule, and risk. You know, those the three important key factors for success. That allows us to drive them down, so that we deliver on time, on schedule, on budget, we get credibility with our client, and we're still able to, you know, generate returns. So moving on to the digital twin. So to achieve what I've mentioned about development, execution, and operation, we have to create that digital twin, which is a digital representation of that asset we will build, whether it's a large offshore platform, a plant, or even just a wellhead, right? And I'll show you an example later on. The whole purpose of that digital twin is to anticipate, allow us to operate, detect, monitor, and collaborate around this. Could be a small project, large projects, right? And to gain an understanding of and a view of how that asset works, then we need to gather the data. It's a lot more IoT than crew morale. So in terms of bandwidth, we're not looking at a large amount of data per sensors, but now some of the projects we're involved actually have so many sensors that the bandwidth is becoming significant. So, and all this data essentially come in so we can understand whether the project and the asset integrity is maintained through this project and deployment. And then we monitor our performance throughout the phases of the project. And so this happens at all phases of our project, whether it's planning, repair and maintenance, inspection. Actually, even on our plants at this time, we have suppliers and customers who come to inspect our system, and they have to do it remotely. So then again, having a connected oil field is key to us just being able to provide the most basic services to our customer or even operate our supply chain. Monitoring, assessing the state of the project, optimize the production and the reservoir, understanding how every one of our tools and assets are working together. Interestingly, a few years back, we were starting to, we had already a lot of sensor all over the oil field, but not to just about every tool and assets that we deploy. And now the trend is every piece of metal that goes out that perform a simple functions, people want it connected. People want to understand the vibrations of the tool because there is something to be learned from that, right? Overall, we want to be proactive, predictable, and fast. Obviously, drive better uptime, be safe, particularly in this current environment, and always optimize the reservoir. I'll just show you. I'm not going to spend much time on that slide, but this is like the whole architecture that runs around having a digital twin. At the bottom, we do have the bottom right. We do have the asset itself, which at the oil site will communicate back to its digital twin representation, which typically nowadays we put in the cloud or on-prem or sometimes a hybrid environment. And that's where we run some AI, some machine learning, understand some diagnostic. There is a lot of work today done on taking that digital representation of what's happening in the oil field, and then running some artificial intelligence to correlate events and learn things that would not be obvious to a human operator. So this is an example of a digital twin that we've built actually for an onshore project. This is a way to combine all the assets that have to run for a well test in the Permian, so in West Texas. We've deployed one of those where you have a descender, you have some filters, oil filters set up all together. They used to take actually a lot more place, and we've integrated all these elements into a very small footprint and created a digital representation of it that allow us to monitor the assets, provide some intelligent control, automated option. And there is actually, on this particular project, a loop back with an artificial intelligence agent that try to run all the activities that's happening at this well in a better manner as the machine learn the right way to handle the flow from the well. Now moving on to just basic remote operation, right? I mean, that's something that's I think in the oil and gas industry we've done for a long time, trying to connect the worker directly to back to the office, having some remote assistance from a center to the field worker. So this has become very, very strategic in the world, with the COVID-19 virus. There are activity today we cannot do, and our operator will not let you do it. Let us do it if we don't have that remote connection. If we have to send more than one worker, we won't be able to access the site. If we cannot connect our customers directly to one of our field workers, we will not get the job. So this is becoming the ability to deploy quickly a field worker with this little helmet and this camera is actually becoming a market differentiator. If we can master the technology, get our guys connected, we will be able to get the contract. Otherwise, some other company will. And to wrap up, this is our typical operation support center. All the big companies had some of those had developed some of those for the past 10 years, where you can monitor activities. So here we have some vessel and subsea activities monitored remotely from a center. This is actually now done from home. And I think we're all getting very comfortable with it. But what used to be, we had the move from, we're going to be in the field, we're going to go and all cuddle in a center in the office around like big tables. Well, now we're able to do that from home. So the paradigm has changed a little bit. And what's interesting is the business was always a bit resistant to move to that, let's do everything from home method. However, there was no choice really with the current environment with the virus. And what we've seen is through the struggle and pressure, the business mindset actually has changed, and now they're embracing it, while 2 months ago they were still resisting it. So this is where we're moving. Will we all be working from home in the near future? I don't think so. I think there is still a lot of need for people to connect and meet in the office, but it's definitely an additional piece to the connected oil field. That's it for me.
Thank you, Arnaud. Very interesting. From the first time you spoke at one of our events, which is probably going back further than either of us would wish to remember. I mean, the advancements in the technology that you've just put on display there was really quite incredible. Thank you very much for talking us through that. Alyson, now, bear with me. Alyson is Head of Digital Innovation Enterprise Telefonica O2, Telefonica UK. And her role is to identify where and how new technologies translate into business solutions. This year's focus is on 5G IoT and the startup community. Alyson, I would like to say, is not an oil and gas professional, nor is she a satellite professional, but she is a 5G professional. So that's the capacity in which she's going to be speaking.
Alyson Edmunds, and I am from O2 UK, which is part of the Telefonica group. Thank you very much for the intro, Paul. So what I wanted to do today was talk about 5G, and it was really interesting listening to the questions earlier on around 5G, and is it going to be a replacement for other networks? And hopefully I'll give you a fair and realistic view of where we are with 5G, especially in the UK, but also some of the things I'm going to talk about are actually based on worldwide standards. So for us, we actually do believe that 5G is more than an upgrade. It's really not just an enhancement to 4G or to 3G. And we genuinely do believe that it is a new vision for connectivity. In fact, I'd go so far as to say this is the first network that has been truly built for the business customer. And when we look at some of the advantages around 5G, you can see that these are some of the speeds, etc., that you're going to get, the lower latency. And from a consumer perspective, they're just going to get those as standard, because when they upgrade their handsets, then obviously they'll get their functionality. But the really interesting thing is around the business aspect. So if we think about private networks, if we think about the ability to have better battery life for things like IoT, and through the presentation, I'll talk you through some of the roadmap. So I always like to start off with 5G and say that actually it's a vision, and it's a vision for connectivity. And actually it's really an evolution leading to a revolution. We're not going to get all of the massive benefits from 5G from day one. And the reason for that is some of it's based on standards, some of it's based on the spectrum that needs to be rolled out. And it's also based on, how quickly we can get that network out. So at the moment, everyone really around the world has rolled out 5G in a non-standalone way. That means that it's based on the 4G core backbone. And it won't be until the end of this year, perhaps the beginning of next year now, based on coronavirus, that we will start to roll out 5G standalone. But that's when it gets really, really interesting, because that's the time when we'll see more enhancements to 5G. So when we get the standalone version, we'll start to see things like mobile edge compute. And you can see on this timeline that it's not until we get towards 2024, 2025, that we'll start to see ultra reliable, low latency and massive machine type communications, which is really what you need to get some of these WISI IoT things in place. So that's a realistic view of where we are from a 5G perspective. I also wanted to cover off IoT, and I'm really pleased I put this slide in, because I've heard quite a lot of the presenters talk about LTE-M and talk about IoT. In the UK, we're just rolling out LTE-M, and it's really interesting actually from an IoT perspective, because with IoT, we've had lots of, we've got thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices all connected in a machine-to-machine way and a little bit of IoT. But LTE-M does actually move that far forward. A really good thing about LTE-M is that you can get hundreds of devices connected per cell, rather than where we are today, where it's a limited number. But to get that massive, the massive throughput that Arnaud talk about, then we really need to start thinking about 5G and massive machine type communications. With that, you'll get thousands of devices that can be connected. And it's really at that point when we'll start to see Industry 4.0, when people talk about driverless cars, remote surgery, etc. That's really when we'll start to see those types of things. So what is the potential then around business and business transformation? Well, definitely we know that 5G will drive different operational efficiencies, and actually new business models will come out of it. It's really interesting that in 2019, we spent about 6 months working with the FTSE 100 customers, really understanding how they felt that 5G would help to transform their business. And I think it's fair to say for a lot of customers, they actually struggled. A lot of what you could do, a lot of what they wanted to be able to do, you can currently do on 4G. But that's good. And the reason why I say that that's good is that I said right at the beginning that 5G is an evolution leading to a revolution. I'll cover off some of the examples that I think could be of benefit in a little while. But also, I know from oil and gas, being able to safeguard your employees is important. So things like body-worn video, all of those sorts of things will take off. And I mentioned right at the beginning that we also need to keep an eye on the consumer. So personalized interactive experiences will definitely be what will count. So one of the first things that we've got with 5G is enhanced mobile broadband. A couple of good images on these slides here. But definitely what we're starting to see that customers are interested in is around CCTV, around video, whether that's 4K, 8K video. That is definitely one of the first business use cases. And also we know that there are changes to drone laws over the next few months. So I think, again, 5G will really help from a drone perspective when we're talking about line of sight and how do we actually connect the two together. But if I could ask you to play the video, I think that really demonstrates some of the work that we've been doing with one particular customer, and I think will bring to life some of the enhancements that we will see through 5G.
Hi, my name's Martin Jackson and I'm Head of Strategy and Architecture at Northumbrian Water Group. The water industry is going through a lot of changes at the moment, and as part of that we now need to do things significantly differently, and innovation's a key aspect to how we can be more disruptive and how we can improve the services that we provide to customers.
5G offers a range of benefits to businesses, and I've spent the last year working with our business customers to look at which products and services we can build and deliver that will help address their problems.
Naturally, 5G technology is reinventing connectivity, and the opportunity to be part of 5G trials and be delivering new 5G capabilities for the benefit of our customers was too big an opportunity for us as an organisation to pass up.
So we're running a series of trials looking at 4 test cases. The first is around using the high speeds of 5G to look at fast upload and download of their GIS data while they're out and about.
The tablets that they use have the latest asset information on, and we can only update that tablet information periodically now due to how big those updates are. And 5G enables us to do that over the air, and the guys who are sitting in the van can conduct the update from their vehicle in a fraction of the time that they could previously.
The second one is using augmented reality for AR mapping, and using a tablet or a HoloLens device, it's giving people 3D visualization of the network beneath them.
That will enable us to be more accurate. We can see also from a health and safety perspective where there may be gas or electricity assets to keep our workforces safe.
The third one is remote experts. So this is where we use technology and video communications to link 2 people remotely. One might be completing a job and they'll be able to link to an expert via a video call to help them complete that job independently.
This really takes it to the next level in terms of more advanced visualizations, real-time communications, and that ability to work seamlessly and collaborate, whether you're in an office environment or out on the front line in the field.
And lastly is in-home water quality, so using IoT sensors to track water quality in customers' homes.
This device is called the Barnacle, and it has a number of sensors embedded into it that measure many different things that can tell us when there's leakage occurring or when there's an issue with water quality in that household. At the moment, the Barnacle device requires a hub and to be connected up to a Wi-Fi network in the home. 5G allows that device to be more self-sufficient and a complete solution.
Ericsson offer a really good solution in their radio dot system. They've worked collaboratively with us, making sure that it's fit for purpose and enabled us to get this trial up and running really quickly.
As a leading water organisation, we're always looking at how we can differentiate ourselves. Being part of the 5G trials enables us to be ahead of all of the other competitors and actually look at how we can deliver better solutions for our customers.
So what we wanted to do with Northumbrian Water Group was to look at the outcomes. What business outcomes were they looking to achieve? How could they help their customers? And hopefully that video gives you a bit of a snippet of some of the things that we will start to see from 5G that becomes mainstream. And then we'll, as Paul said, I work a lot with the startup community. So we're looking to extend that trial and include some real innovative new solutions from the startup community as well, such as using bone conduction, headsets, and also using things like connected lampposts, connected signage, etc. in some of their car parks and street furniture. So one of the other things that I wanted to do as well was talk about I said that this is going to be nearer 2014, 2015, but it's really key and critical, I think, for your industry. And this is when we'll get ultra reliable, low latency, and we'll get massive machine type communications. And really, this is when Industry 4.0 will take off, ideal for your industry and also from a manufacturing perspective. The great thing about 5G, though, is it's all carrier-grade security, and I know that security has been mentioned a couple of times today. And I think that mobile edge compute will really make a massive difference as well, so bringing the edge of the network closer to the mobile. But in order for all of this to work, I think from an oil and gas perspective, then we need to be looking at the network of networks, and that's where we get ubiquity of coverage, really, and so that there's handover between Wi-Fi, between satellite, and between 5G. So that's a bit of a time off, but what we are doing, I know one of the other presenters earlier on mentioned that they were working with ESA. Well, so are we. So we're actually doing some of that testing at the moment to see how does it work in reality, what's the experience like, etc. And the other interesting thing as well around both 5G and LTE is around private networks. Again, I think a good roadmap item for you as an industry. So I hope that you agree that the future is set to be transformative. I'll say it again, it is a journey. You know, we're not actually there today. We are in the process of rolling out. To give you some indication, by the end of the summer, we will probably have about 50 sites or 50 areas that will be live with 5G. But currently we're rolling out in places like shopping centres, stadiums, railway hubs, and large city centre destinations, etc. So without a doubt, 5G will be transformative, and I'm happy to take any questions at the end that anyone might have. Thank you very much, Paul.
Right, the one thing I will say about oil and gas connectivity upstream specialists is that they are very, very quick to understand, you know, how to apply these types of technologies to their own situation. So I can imagine them sitting out there, listening to everything that you're saying, watching what you put on the screen, and thinking, I know exactly what I'm going to do with that. So thanks very much, Alyson. I'm going to invite David up now, David Burt. Right, I'll just introduce David. David, a seasoned professional with 25 years of experience in the Satcoms industry. His current mission is developing business for Comtech EF Data's Heights VSAT platform for the maritime and satellite operator market segments. He's got a particular knowledge of satellite network design, VSAT networks, MEOs, and the maritime and mobile backhaul verticals. So, David, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paul. We've heard a number of speakers banter around terms such as digital oil field, connected oil field, field of the future. So these are all different terms that are being applied to digital transformation projects, which Alyson rightly said is really more about enabling business outcomes from these digital technologies. And probably one of the best examples of how the industry is doing that is in the way it's transforming maintenance, right? So some companies have said that predictive maintenance is the killer app for IoT within oil and gas. Why is that? Well, you've got the possibility to reduce failures and downtime, which is critical, but also reduce the cost of the maintenance at the same time. So you're able to improve the outcome and reducing the cost to provide that outcome. And you're able to do this in a way that improves safety because you have more time to anticipate these interventions and do it when it's convenient, when you have the right weather window, etc. This is important because in this industry, a shutdown, you know, the impact of a shutdown is measured in millions of dollars, right? So there's real money at stake here. So being able to recognize the early warning signs is important. It's difficult because the root cause is often different than the final presentation of these issues. And you see a lot of companies who are implementing preventive maintenance programs who are looking at reducing their outages by 50% on an annual basis. So this is having a pretty significant impact on their business outcomes. How are they doing that? Well, instead of just monitoring for equipment failure, they're monitoring and trending the data around the device, right? So they're monitoring vibration, temperature, flow rate, pressure, all these different sensors around the device in question, bringing that back and analyzing that using artificial intelligence. So OSIsoft, one of the leading companies in real-time space in the industry, used with virtually all of the major oil companies, gave an example of an engine failure where 2.5 days before the failure, there was a vibration signature that was identifiable. 2 weeks before the actual failure, there was an oil pressure trend that changed, right? So if you're able to measure these, identify them, and act on them, you have weeks or days in advance of the failure to do this early intervention. The earlier on you can do this, the smaller the intervention, right? The goal of maintenance is to address small issues before they become big ones. So this is really what we're seeing, driving the need for this. So how much data? This is an example that OSIsoft has published. Syncrude was the customer who implemented this and reduced their annual maintenance costs by 20 million. In this case, that was about 50% of their annual maintenance costs. To do that, in this particular case, they implemented 1,716 data points a second that they were bringing back, which results in something just over a megabit of data. So not a whole lot of data, especially when you compare it to the overall savings that they're talking about. And the data rates are higher once you're running diagnostics, right? So this is kind of a steady state bringing data back. But if you see an issue, you need to dive in and do more detailed analysis. The actual data rates pulling this back can be significantly higher, right? So the key takeaway here is that the business value of these solutions far exceeds the cost to implement them. In our industry, we tend to niggle over every single kilobit. It's not really about the cost, it's about the value at the end of the day. And these applications are providing tremendous value. A lot of times the problem with implementing these solutions is there's a legacy system in there that's running out of capacity, right? It simply doesn't have the headroom to deal with these. These were put in a few years back when kilobits seemed just fine. Now megabits are required. The typical alternative there is to upgrade your RF to support bigger carriers, right? Requires opening the radome, possible damage, bigger bucks. Do they fit? Do you have to rebalance? Worker certification, right? Do you need two technicians to do this change? So there's a considerable complexity involved in this. And so a better solution would be to implement a more efficient VSAT platform, such as Comtech Heights, and do more with the existing RF, right? So people in the industry know that Comtech is famous for our efficiency. And so, spectral efficiency charts like this are no surprise. What a lot of people don't understand, is less well known, is our advantage in terms of terminal efficiency. So this slide compares two scenarios, a kind of traditional TDMA uplink. In this case, it's 0.7 megasymbols, and they're supplying 256K per user, shared by a number of users within the TDMA frame. If you were to replace that using that modem technology with Heights HDNA, we're able to get 1.8 megabits out of the same link, right? We're doing it primarily through two ways. One, we're able to achieve a higher mod cod because of the efficiency, and two, the use of a dedicated carrier rather than a shared carrier is more efficient in terms of RF usage. So in this case, you've got 256K uplink capability with the TDMA, that's it, you're able to upgrade to 1.8 megs going to HDNA. So 7 times improvement, which gives you that headroom to be able to support the data that you need to deploy these applications in a very cost-effective way, only doing it with the below-deck equipment, not susceptible to weather and things like that. So a much more streamlined implementation. So in terms of takeaways here, the first is the benefits of technologies like predictive maintenance or other digital transformation technologies is really compelling from a business outcome perspective in terms of, reducing downtime, lowering costs. But even with that, projects have to be implemented in a cost-conscious way. Using the efficiency of a platform like Context Heights, you're able to reduce the CapEx by getting more out of your current equipment, and also reduce the bandwidth that you use, which saves OpEx and helps pay for the upgrade projects themselves. And so with that, Paul, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, David. Much appreciated. Okay, next up we got Ali Yunus. If you could join us in the room, Ali. Ali has put the small sat case at 2 or 3 of our programs over the last couple of years, which is really good news because it obviously, is an important development for the industry. Just to give you a bit of background, he heads up the business development and product marketing for Astranis, and they claim that 4 billion people still have no internet access, and they're here to change that. And they're going to do that by making smaller, more powerful satellites at a fraction of the cost. And we would all love to see you do it. So, Ali, let me hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, and thanks to Century 21 for putting this webinar together. I've learned so much so far today, and I hope I'm going to be able to contribute to your audience and the value of this webinar. Now, I got to say, I am by no means an oil and gas expert. I have been in the satellite industry, though, for quite some time. And I have interfaced with the energy sector for a while, but not an expert by any means. So do forgive me if I don't bring that level of expertise as some other speakers over here. But having said that, yes, I had business development at Astranis, and Astranis is a manufacturer and operator of small sats. We nickname our small sats micro geos. And just to give the audience a very quick idea of what that means, because the term small sat can mean a lot of different things depending on who you're talking to. Our satellites are roughly, you can hug them actually. They're roughly 1 cubic meter big, and they provide both broadband and broadcast services. And a very rough order of magnitude for broadband services. A satellite is capable, a micro geo is capable of generating anywhere between 10 to 15 gigabits per second, depending on all the factors that go into that. So having said that, I hope that sets the stage for what a small sat means in this context. And I'll go straight into the talk. Now, what I thought of doing is going through some of the fundamentals here to kind of set the framework for my talk today and be able to contribute to the panel. So let's take a look at some of the basics so far in the industry. I believe there is absolutely no question and no doubt about the need for connectivity in the oil and gas sector or the larger energy sector. As a matter of fact, we've been looking at all the types of connectivity during the presentations and all of the services enabled by connectivity, whether it's IoT, maintenance, and so on. So that is an established fact. Let's take a closer look at the industry itself. The industry used to be a premium vertical, a premium market segment for satellite operators, given the profitability of the sector. And since at least the oil crash in 2014, that is no longer the case, neither for satellite service providers or satellite operators. Pricing has gone down from over $1,000 a megahertz 5, 6, 7 years ago to a few hundred or some $100 a megabit per second or megahertz per second a month today. It's a dramatic decline in pricing, and accordingly, revenues from the sector have gone down too. And multiple speakers have touched on this point, but here you see a chart that reflects the volatility in the industry. Earlier this year, oil was trading at a high of just over $60, and then on the 20th of April, boom, a historic moment, an unfortunate historic moment where WTI traded for negative $36 a barrel. That is just unconceivable. I still can't wrap my head around that event. And so one of the main issues, given the volatility, is bandwidth. I mean, if you want to have a successfully connected oil field and continuous successful operations, whether it's IoT, crew welfare, digging, drilling, maintenance, all of that is really at the end of the day powered by connectivity and bandwidth. Without connectivity, none of these services would exist. So regardless, the immense value that these services bring to the oil field or the connected oil field, at the end of the day, the problem of expensive bandwidth has to be solved. And one way to do that, and I hope the title of the slide does not mislead the audience as in this is the only way to do it. It's just one possible solution to do that is with small satellites. And the way we look at it is a small satellite, as you can see by the chart that I have on the screen right now, is so much smaller than a large traditional satellite. It is literally an order of magnitude less expensive than a large GEO. And yes, some people might immediately be jumping to the thought, well, a large GEO has hundreds of gigabits per second, and as I introed, our micro GEO can generate anywhere between 10 to 15, in some cases, potentially 20 gigabits per second. That is true. However, these large GEOs also come with an immensely large platform, bus, and overhead. And all of that is cost that is reflected in the payload in the dollar per megabit per second per month. With a small micro GEO, those extra expenses of payload, bus, and overhead are minimized dramatically so that the cost per megabit per second, and I want to emphasize here one point, the effective cost per megabit per second, where you actually factor in the fill rate. With such a small micro GEO, your fill rate is almost guaranteed to be at full capacity on day one, enabling an effective return on investment. With those large micro GEOs, fill rates are still a big problem and a big pain point, where you take years to come up to, if lucky, 50 or 60% fill rate. And all that idle capacity will still be charged to the customers because there is a specific IRR that the satellite operator needs to make. So having said that, we believe that these small micro GEOs, given their small size and the fact that they fill up really fast, cost less. That's not just a belief, that is a fact. We're excited about the satellite that we will be launching for Alaska very soon. And the other very interesting factor when it comes to small micro GEOs is the rapid time to market. Within 18 months from making a decision, such a micro GEO can be launched, and it will provide a service that is dynamic, that has the latest technology, And that, again, having the latest technology on board of the satellite enables cost-efficient bandwidth. And so we want to move, going back to this fundamental, we want to move or shift from treating the oil and gas sector, and really all verticals, but especially given the volatility of the oil and gas sector, we want to move from treating them as a customer, build them with ownership dynamics with a fungible asset. These small satellites are powered with a software-defined radio that supports cloud-based connectivity that today has become absolutely essential to a successful connected oil field. It has become one of the main services provided by the satellite service providers, the speedcasts, the rignets, the KVHs, to the oil field. And hence such a small, fungible asset, a small satellite like a microgeo, can become dedicated to a single player, whether that player is the oil and gas producer themselves or a satellite service provider to the oil and gas producer, helping them manage the entire end-to-end solution, including the bandwidth part, and have some control over that, even to the extent that they would be able to move that satellite from one orbital slot to another to provide different geographic coverage for potentially the same global player from one part in the world to another part in the world. And so having said that, I'd really like to summarize and just say that the volatile nature of the oil and gas sector requires both low-cost bandwidth that we should continue to try to solve and tackle head-on, and not just provide extra services on top. Those services are immensely valuable, but we need to solve the problem of expensive bandwidth. And one way to do that and offer fungible, flexible, dedicated services is by providing these small satellites and making them available to the industry. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. I'll ask you to leave the room, and I'll bring in Tim Canning now. That's okay. And we'll bring you back for the Q&A. 1 second. Right. Tim has over 3 decades of experience at each of the end user, engineering, contractor, and system integrated tiers of the oil and gas industry, which is actually quite a unique experience. I don't know anybody who's been involved in all 3. But he's managed projects on behalf of a number of, major organisations like ABB, Honeywell, Nexen, CNOOC, Maersk Oil, and has got quite a depth of expertise, and more recently has evolved a specific expertise in cybersecurity. Yeah, if I put that well enough, is it?
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
All right, so I'm going to let Tim take over. Just
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Tim Canning. As Paul put it, unfortunately, I'm involved in a project that's gone slightly awry on behalf of my client, and we are in a bit of a recovery mode. So I wasn't entirely sure I was going to make it this afternoon. Happily, we managed to make enough of a space, and I've very much enjoyed the talks throughout the afternoon. So thank you to all the previous speakers. I've learned a great deal too. So what I was going to screen was a thing called the Purdue Enterprise Reference Model, or PERA. It's a very traditional view of a control and automation suite for an industrial facility. But the reality is it needs to change, and it needs to be remodeled, because what we're looking at is a very straightforward view of a process sensor at level 0, which is touching some piece of machinery or some fluid or solid that's being moved around. which is reporting to a PLC, which is then producing data, which is reported up to an HMI. That might be sent to a central control room and then up through a couple of firewalls up to some kind of onshore or away from site office location where business decisions are being made. Of course, we're now in a world where we're pushing more of that intelligence and more of that decision making, both up and down. So we're getting smarter process sensors that have the ability to be configured and programmed actually in the sensor. So there is no controller required. You can have all of that directly touching the media. But we're also pushing a lot of the decision making up with much more remote operation of plants. And we've talked about lots of digital twins, but in top of that, and the digital oil field, we're also looking to take people away from the industrial plant in a lot of different environments, whether it's grid distribution of power, delivery of water, or in the upstream oil and gas system, where we want as few people offshore as possible, both from a cost, but primarily a safety perspective too. So we now have a conundrum that there's a lot of data being moved around. A lot of it's being used for decision making in an automated way. But it's getting harder to decide where that decision is being made and where the data point that's being moved is created. So that makes a risk assessment issue for us. On top of that, in much of our industrial world, we do a risk assessment based on single jeopardy. So we take one thing that could potentially or realistically happen with a measured level of possibility, likelihood, and we consider what impact that could have. And then we protect against that, either by having maybe 2 sensors or 2 valves or other protective measures. When we think about cybersecurity, we have to take the model from the other end. We have to take the event first. Several different elements of our process. I ran the program for Nexon for quite a while. And when we were talking to the leadership, trying to get this point across, we used the example of a process, a main power generation turbine, where you have a package control PLC. So if you do something to that, you can try and damage the engine. But the machine protection system will detect the excess vibration or over temperature, and it will take the protective measures to turn the turbine off and save your high value asset. But with a cyber attack, it's very easy, relatively speaking, to stop that machine protection system from being in operation and then prompt the machine control system to turn off something, say, maybe a lubrication pump. And then very quickly, you turn a multi-million-pound turbine into a very, very expensive problem that you've now got to fix. So when we started doing our risk assessments, we took the opportunity to learn from the process safety world and put scenarios into play that we felt were realistic, because there are lots of things you could potentially say on an industrial plant could go wrong or you could cause to go wrong. But you have to take a realistic view, because most industrial plants are not designed only with electronic protections, but they'll have mechanical protections as well. So you take a scenario and you play it to see whether it's real. And then working backwards, we can use what Lockheed Martin called the kill chain approach. Possible. And then when we looked at that, we looked.
Hello, Tim. I don't know if you can hear me. We're losing sound from you. I don't know if you've pulled.
I apologise for that. Okay,
we got you now.
Okay, I think I've got a headset problem, but okay, I'll hold the piece of wire in the position that works. So we were talking about leveraging the process safety world. So we've now got a kill chain that says these are the steps that we have to take if I'm an adversary to cause the scenario that's been postulated, and we need to take a layer of protection approach and decide what the steps are to take that step away and break the chain, and assign a level of effectiveness to each of those. And this is where cybersecurity safety becomes a little bit more tricky, because in the process safety world, we have API numbers, we have things like the ERIDA database, which will tell us what the reliability of a piece of equipment is and what the protective value of it is. And we can actually run a calculation that tells us whether we have sufficient protection. In the cybersecurity world, those numbers don't exist. So we have to take a reasoned view. But by doing it this way, we could put a protective measure on a piece of paper, on a spreadsheet, and say, we think it gives this much protection. And if at some point in the future we find that that's now not a protective measure because a new vulnerability has been found, or a new workaround, or some piece of software has gone into the adversary's toolkit, we can take that out and we can decide whether we still have enough protection, or whether we need to take some kind of like remedial measure. The thing that's hampering us in a lot of this is the fact that most of the industrial protocols that we're using at the machine level are very old, and they aren't designed for protection in a cybersecurity world. So we find ourselves in a world where we have things like ICS-sploit, which is a Metasploit style framework, which you can develop tools in for attacking industrial control systems. That's freely downloadable. It's built into the latest version of Kali, a Linux-based pen testers toolkit. We find ourselves with people building modules for a man-in-the-middle attacking tool called Ettercap, which most of you will probably be familiar with, which again are aimed at protocols like Modbus and DMP3, with a view to making it's called Modbus VCR, and it will allow you to record, alter, and then play back industrial protocol messages using the Modbus protocol. And then there are search engines specifically for finding vulnerable equipment. So Shodan is the one I use the most when I'm on task as a pen tester, white hat pen tester, I hasten to add. But then we have the people out there, the advanced persistent threat agents like the Black Energy APT and various threat groups that are directly targeting industrial control systems. So what do we do about that? There are a lot of border protection type devices available on the market, and we absolutely should be using those. But there are advanced techniques that are much to the fore and probably will end up being much more effective. The previous speaker, but one, was talking about the smart signal, smart sensing, predictive maintenance type approach. This can be used in cybersecurity as well. So we can be looking at what devices are talking to each other and whether they suddenly, there's something new talking to something that it's never talked to before across the network. That's fairly straightforward. That's intrusion detection. But we can extend that. And there are tools that we've deployed in the past which are looking at process values and at looking at process values across a number of systems to find discrepancies and unusual behavior patterns. So for example, if you put an override and a defeat into a machine protection system and then turned off the lube oil pump for a turbine, that would be flagged very quickly, because that is an unusual and an unlikely operator-driven event. So these tools and these intelligent ways of developing our security exist, but they need more development, and we need to be using them more widely. And one of the other things that's probably of more interest to maybe the more telecoms focused viewers is the fact that we need to be bringing more of this network data and network capturing away from the industrial systems where we tend to have fairly low bandwidth levels. So if we're going to be monitoring networks, we need the data. And then if we're going to investigate and understand attacks that do get through and do happen, we need the underlying information, which means that instead of blended data points and logical states resulting from multiple sensors, we need the raw data from the multiple systems and the network capture, and we need to be feeding that back to a secure store, possibly at site and away from site. So there is going to be an increasing demand for bandwidth as a result of the security, as well as the operability and the plant operation improvement. In the 10, 12 years I've been doing this, certainly we are a vastly improved space, trying to finish on a positive note, as you should in any good presentation. There is still a long way to go, but the tools that are coming through and the recognition that this is a problem is definitely increased today from where we were when I started this, as I say, 10 years ago. So I think I'll leave it there, Paul. Thank you.
Right, bear with me. Okay, good. Now, with the Q&A, what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite Alyson to join me. I'm going to invite Alyson to join me first, and because there are a couple of 5G questions which I think she's going to enjoy fielding. Then I'm going to ask her to leave the room and invite the rest of you back to spare her from the heavily nuanced Satcoms and oil and gas conversation that I'm sure we're going to have. Thanks, Alyson. I've got a question here from Dawn Murray. She's service operations lead at British Petroleum. She's based up in Aberdeen, and I think she spoke on a conference that we organised up there last year. Do you think we are ready for 5G offshore?
I don't think, no. I mean, as I said right at the beginning, what we're doing is rolling out, but we're really covering areas such as shopping centres, railway hubs, large conurbation areas. And so I wouldn't say, I think it's a roadmap, you know, it is an evolution, as I keep saying. So I think that there's been really good presentations about LTE-M and IoT. And I think, you know, where we are today is we currently have really good 4G connectivity. That would be my realistic opinion. Right. I also saw there was another question about when are we going to get 5G on the shore or something like that. Mm-hmm. Again, you know, it's the same sort of answer. Really, it's probably not one of the first places that we will be rolling out, especially in the UK. Could be different in other parts of the world, of course. Mm-hmm.
All right, good. I've got a colleague of yours sent a question in. Gajwani.
Right. Hope it's an easy one.
It starts, so it's already upbeat. In your trials with Northumbrian Water, did you need the 5G mast to be in line of sight with the instruments sending data back to the servers?
What we did, yeah, interesting question. So what we did with Northumbrian Water Group is we did put in a private 5G network, so we could actually do that testing and evaluation. So it was within a defined area.
Yeah.
And I think the video shows some of the creativity really that we were able to show. I particularly like the one with the map and you know, showing the pipes underground. I think that was a bit of a light bulb moment. So yeah, it was definitely private 5G.
Okay, fine. Now I asked this question earlier, but I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to put it to you. This actually came from somebody based in Bogota from a company called STE. Will 5G replace all other cellular technologies?
Well, it's at the moment it's an overlay to 4G. I think we're going to have 4G will be the connectivity for a lot of people for some considerable time. Eventually, oh yes, 5G will it replace? Well, there will always be, you know, the way that we're upgrading the network is it's still using the 4G core, as I said. So eventually, but you know, will we be at 6G then? Who knows?
You're already talking about 6G. I'm not even sure that everybody really understands at this point, but it's anyway. All right, Alyson, that's great. Thank you very much for joining us. It's been really nice having you. I'll ask you to leave the room. Could everybody else join now so we can get involved in a Satcoms type conversation? Right. I think this one's mainly for David. This is from Renato Goodfellow at British Telecom, BT. See the good examples of machine learning David presented. Problem I have seen before is, whilst there are economies of scale to develop such models once, then utilize across the industry, companies do not like helping to develop the learning to be shared with their competitors. Have you got a comment on that?
Yeah, so that's absolutely true. I think there's a shortcut there, and Tim alluded to it actually, in that a lot of the equipment has the sensors built into it. So a compressor will have a number of sensors built into it, and what a lot of the vendors do is they will sell you an analytics service for their compressors, and kind of by default they're aggregating the knowledge across different customers who are using that compressor, and using that knowledge to provide you those insights on yours. So you're not directly competing, but your information helps. Now, there was an interesting case that Petronas did, where they actually said, you know what, that's our data. I'm not going to pay you to tell me what the data I own says. So they built a system that did their own analysis. It was OSI Soft was the platform they used. And then they actually turned around to sell that data back to the vendor, arguing that the vendor is using that information to help them with R&D and new product development, so it had value to them. Now, I don't know if they actually, got paid by them, but there's an argument to be made that the value of the data goes upstream as well as downstream.
Okay, good. Anyone else have a comment on that?
When I was at Nexon, we spent quite a lot of time exchanging data with turbine provider companies, but it was always a difficult discussion around where is this information going. And again, from a point of view of an operator, there's business advantage potentially to people if they know what the state of your plant is. So we had to make sure this was anonymized, aggregated, potentially blended with other people's data, and protect ourselves. So I completely agree. There's always that it's our data, it's protecting our company consideration.
I think the value chain involved complicates things as well. We're kind of talking, that a rig is a nice homogeneous entity, but the reality is you've got different contractors and subcontractors to subcontractors. And you may have to go through 3 different contractual relationships to actually make use of that data. And that certainly complicates things.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, here's one that I think Tim's going to want to answer. I think we lost Arnaud, but I'm hoping he'll come back. Anyway, is it safe to run oil and gas apps in the cloud, being the data is so sensitive? Now, this is from Johnny Villasmil, who's a senior telecom engineer at Bechtel in Saudi. He's actually...
Okay, from a position of sensitivity, I guess we got to...
Tim, I think we lost you again.
How about now? I'm so sorry about this.
Okay.
It's been fine for 9 weeks. Maybe that's why it's broken, because I've been using it solidly for 9 weeks. But sensitivity is an interesting point, because obviously there's business sensitivity, but then there's a safety sensitivity. And one of the things that we alluded to is there are tools appearing regularly now that will allow you to intercept, edit, alter, and retransmit ICS data using ICS protocols on the fly. So when you're moving this data around, you need to be sure you understand what it should look like when it gets to the other end. And if you're moving data away from a control system or even an IO subsystem, from sensors and electronic transducers that turn the raw signal into data, and putting that control or decision-making system in the cloud, I guess the first thing to say is make sure your cloud's properly configured and your security's dealt with, because that's everybody has data breaches because they don't do their AWS bucket properly. But realistically, it comes back to what we were talking about before, about making sure you know what it looks like and know what it should look like, and that you're protecting it. Because if you're making decisions on bad data, or you're allowing someone to push data back into your control system that's been edited on the fly, it will do things that you don't expect at times you don't expect them. And this has happened. That's almost what happened with the Trisis attack in a Middle Eastern country about 2 years ago, where a safety system was reprogrammed remotely using all the right protocols, but a non-OEM provided, shall we say, version of the programming tool. And the only reason that that was discovered is because the adversary didn't truly understand the Triconic's product programming system, and revealed themselves by shutting the control system down by accident. If they'd programmed their tool properly, we probably still wouldn't know that had been done today. Paul, you're on mute now.
Oh, am I? Excuse me. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Oh, thank heavens. Right. Okay. This is from Ronald Hurtado. He's an engineer at Caltech, based in Lima, and he's asking, how is IoT being considered for future traffic in satellite networks? Which is a bit of an open question, but I'm sure you've all got a comment for that. Stephane, do you want to kick off?
I'm just not sure what he means by traffic in satellite networks. There's plenty. There's maybe 2 million IoT devices that run on various satellite systems today. So there's as many configurations as end users.
Here's one from SpaceX, Diego Paldal, and it's a very simple question. Is latency really a concern in this sector?
For some things, it could be, yes. Let me give you an example that I particularly like. It's natural gas plants. If you have to shut them, then you have to do it really quickly, because there's gas in the pipeline, and there's chemical sensors all along the way. And you have literally fractions of a second to make your decisions before you have to also shut the main gas refinery, which then gets all contaminated, and you have to redo all the chemical calibrations and so on. And so not only do the systems have to be extremely reliable, and it's triple redundant VSATs, but the speed at which the signal travels is relevant. It's relevant also in a smart grid, where now it's microseconds. The scale at which you have to control the grid is microseconds. Otherwise, the voltage differences from one end to the grid to the other could cause spikes and shut the whole system down. So you can find use cases where the latency comes into play. However, those systems, there are examples in both cases that run on GEOs today. So somehow they get by with the 200 milliseconds.
Okay. Anyone else? Tim? All right. Sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to completely agree with what was said. That there are lots of process applications where latency is a real issue, particularly in safety systems, in making sure all the various different controllers can talk to each other, and any increase in latency can lead to a controller voting itself off the network and a plant trip, which can cost significant amounts of money beyond the downtime. So yeah, I think I completely agree. It's
one of those things that looks good, that is good on paper, but the satellite link is not going to be the only cause of latency. And if you want to shut the pump very quickly, how quickly is the pump going to shut, and what else is going to delay the decision? And if it turns out that gaining 200 and 250 milliseconds on just a satellite link is not that decisive, you're asking the oil company to make all sorts of decisions on antennas and choosing providers and so on for something which they may not even be sure is going to have a bearing on a problem at the end, which is why it's so hard to sell those low latency systems in those environments.
Yeah. Okay. I want to bring Ali into the conversation now. This is another question from Renato Goodfellow at BT, and Renato is usually quite activist with his questions. He's always got a few coming in. Do the small satellites referenced provide real-time connectivity or data store and forward, or both?
No, absolutely. Of course, just like any other satellite, GEO, MEO, or LEO, small satellites do provide real-time connectivity. No data storage. If we're talking about some sort of a cloud-based storage within the spacecraft itself, that is not provided, as it is not by any other major satellites. The only project that I know of, not actual product, is Space Belt by Cloud Constellation, which would provide a cloud-based, satellite-based cloud system. We don't provide data storage, but just like any other satellite, real-time communication.
Okay, good. And right, here's one from Ton Ebenhorst, Orange Business Services. Will the demise of LeoSat and OneWeb create opportunities for other LEO MEOs for more success? I'm in the case of OneWeb, certainly, I'm actually quite interested in what's going to happen with their assets. But do you want to take that over? Anyone?
In fairness to OneWeb, we don't know that they've been demised yet.
Yes. Yeah.
Good question. We don't know. It all depends on with LeoSat. There wasn't much to salvage, but with OneWeb, they are functioning satellites and IP and spectrum, and yeah, there are bidders out there who could repurpose that. So,
as a matter of fact, they changed their filing today to increase it with the FCC to increase it to 48,000 satellites, LEO satellites. I don't know if anyone caught the news today, but this just hit the news hours ago. To Stephane's point, we don't know that it's over.
Yeah, they're not the only ones. The satellite industry is up to its old tricks already. It's something like 50,000 satellites got filed on today, but it's just paper. The ultimate question is making it all work and whether the demand is there, and only that.
Well, they have assets. I mean, they're not just going to leave them there. I mean, I would imagine they're looking to be a target.
Paul, the problem is the world is full of people who have assets in every sector.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Just bear with me. Right, there's another one from Renato. Thank you, Stephane, for the analysis. So the cost-benefit analysis of more bandwidth and move to cloud is not compelling or easy to prove at the moment for end users. And he's put a question mark there.
Oh, God forbid, I never said that. No, it is very compelling. The white papers, I mean, it's nobody's saying that the technology that we've discussed today, that it doesn't work or it's a bad idea. It's just that the energy companies, it's not the only fish they have to fry. They stumble over the cost because they have no money, and they would on capex on new projects. They might not have new projects for a while. That's the problem. See, they're all for improving their rigs, but if they don't deploy them, they're not going to spend much on them. Then it's here we're very focused on telecoms, and so we think the world hinges on telecoms. But a lot of what we've discussed is incidental on producing oil, and it competes with equally cool technology that directly produces the oil. So if you troll the oil industry's magazines and technology conferences, you might find as many references to new materials for drill bits, for instance, which is another very hot area in the sector. That saves money too. It can save on maintenance too. Okay, you can do predictive maintenance on your pumps, but how many pumps do you have to manage, first of all? And you can also have a backup pump or a better pump. And you have 50 pump vendors that barge into the room saying, yeah, my pump doesn't need predictive maintenance because it doesn't break. So the energy companies at the end look at all this and say, it's adding complexity. You say that you're going to make my life easier, but right now you're adding about 15 decisions to my stack of decisions to make. So we'll deal with this next month. And in the meantime, oil crashes to $20.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, let's do one more. This is from Morten Hansen, VP Commercial Maritime and Energy at SES. What operational impact will the lack of proper connectivity have on your offshore facilities and vessels?
I think it's really a question of lost opportunities, right? I heard a term used recently, value leakage. There's something like 30,000 sensors on a modern platform, and something like 1% of that is actually used. Mm-hmm. So how much value is actually left in those other sensors? So I think the clear answer is yes, there's definitely some. The question is, where is it? And so it will be the companies who see the value in those and particular use cases, right? And they come from places that aren't obvious, always obvious. But it'll be those companies who see opportunities. Is a platform or a rig that only has 512K going to fall over and stop production and become less reliable? Probably not. Could they do it more efficiently with more connectivity? Most certainly.
Well, you can also have lots of data that's used forensically. Then you understand what failed after the fact and you fix it, and then it doesn't happen again. That's value from IoT as well, but it doesn't transmit anything to you.
Okay, all right. Any other comments you want to add before I close? Sorry, Tim, I think we've lost you again.
This time, last one. I was just saying that there's a company in Aberdeen that's supplying banking monitoring software to alarms and trips on oil platforms. It's a company called Intelligent Plant, and what they're doing is they're taking a trip event that occurs and they're working backwards in the stored data to look for patterns. So every time that trip occurs, they look back for the pattern, and they find regularly that they could spot when the trip's going to happen, and that again is not something that doesn't happen off the rig. It happens on the rig in a closed loop environment. So in supporting what you were saying is not having connectivity. I agree completely that there's much that you can do if you have it, but without it there are still other things that you can do to improve your delivery.
Sure. Anything to add? All right, well, we're on time to close the proceedings now. Thank you, panelists, for your very interesting presentations of your contribution to the Q&A, and hope to see you again soon on one of these events. And bye now. Okay, so with that, we'll sign off. What I want to say, just bear with me, I'm going to put this, my business card up again. Now, anybody who has any further questions about these presentations, anything that they want to say to the speakers, you're welcome to send the questions to me, and I will make sure that whoever you're addressing receives whatever it is you're trying to actually say to them. So please, you're more than welcome to try and keep the dialogue going that way. Keep monitoring the Century 21 website for future events coming up very soon. We've got Satellite and the 5G journey, that's in June. In July, we've got Connected Transport. These programs are being developed as we speak, but I'm sure they will be every bit as interesting as the one that we've heard today. And I think with that, I think we can end the webinar. So all of you, thank you again for attending, and stay safe. Hope to see you soon.